Everyone, welcome to class number 2. These classes are on frameworks, and I hope everybody has gone through the framework class number 1 before jumping into this class. And even before coming into the framework sections, I hope everybody has gone through the TestNG and the Java tutorials, and I hope everyone is comfortable with the Java and TestNG part of the frameworks. Now, in this class, we will talk about different approaches that we can use to design particular components of our framework. In this class, we will specifically pick up the data provider component, which is responsible for giving us the test data and the run configurations for the framework. We will go into details of that of the data provider in a few minutes, but before that, I will quickly take you through the agenda of our class today. And the agenda is we will talk about designing data providers. After that, we will talk about data sources. Data sources could be a text file, an Excel file, or an XML file. It could be anything. We will primarily take an example of a text file in this case, and then we will talk about the different kinds of data provider that we need, which is the run configuration provider and the test data. This is not an interface, this should be a class. So these are the two types of data providers that we require, and then we will talk in more details about them. So this is pretty much the agenda today for this class. This class will include the coding part as well, so I hope you have really gone through your Java stuff, and you understand how we can design a class and how we can quickly write some classes to achieve a particular task. Now in this class, you might see a couple of new classes, which inbuilt classes of Java. For example, in here you would see the property class and a buffered reader class and the file reader class, which we will use to read configurations from a text file. Right, so you will see all those classes. Now before I go into those classes and the details of those classes, I will quickly take you through a typical journey of a framework, the typical life cycle of a framework. Now let me open an image that I have created. This is the workflow. So a typical workflow, I cannot. Am I able to do that? Just give me a minute. Let me just try to scroll it up. No, we can't do that. So a typical workflow of a framework, if we have any options. Yeah, so I can zoom it out. So yeah, typical workflow of a framework actually is like this. We start with the very first stage, which is the start test stage. In this stage, someone sends a run request. So in this place you get a run request. Now I have to increase the size, but that's fine. So the very first stage is it receives a request to run your tests, right? So once a request is received, the framework tries to pull out the run configurations. By run configuration, I mean that it will try to pull out information like the browser list on which the test needs to be run, the environment details, right? Details and the various timeouts and couple of more things based on what your framework, what are the prerequisites of your framework, right? So these conditions, these variables are required by the framework to start your tests, right? We call this kind of data as the run configuration. Well, right now the writing might not be that good because it's an image file, but that's fine. So a run configuration is the set of information that is required to start your framework, right? Once the framework has started, once it knows what browser it has to run the tests on and what are the environment details, and right here it will also know what are the test types that it has to pick. For example, it has to pick the P1 tests or just the login tests or just the buy test or whatever it could be. So from the framework configuration, it will pick up what kind of tests it has to run. Once it knows what test it needs to run, it will go to the tests module and pull out all the relevant tests. Pull the tests based on the request. So it will pull all the tests. Just after that, it will run all the tests. Once it has run all the tests, it will go here and it will analyze the logs, and it will collate and generate a report out of it. So like this. So this phase will do this. It will report results phase will analyze your logs and report, and then after creating a report, it will send across to whoever are the stakeholders, for example the whole team, or it could be anyone, right? So once the report is sent out, it will go into the idle state, it will stop, and here it will keep listening to a new request, right? So it will keep on waiting for someone to start a new request, and if a new request comes in, we again go back into the same workflow, right? So basically a typical framework has this workflow, and based on your project you might have one or two stages in between these tests, in between these states. So it completely depends on what your framework and what application for which you are trying to write your framework. Now a basic workflow is like this, and these are the basic steps that will be present in the framework. We will start our learning assuming that these are the only basic steps, and then once you know how to program for these steps, you will know how to add more steps based on your application. So this was about the framework, a typical workflow of a framework. Now let us quickly jump into the agenda and let us see what we have for today. So the first part is designing data provider. Now we first of all, before designing the data provider, we should know what the data provider is supposed to do, right? So if I go back into the, let me zoom it first. If I go back into the workflow of our framework, you would see that there are two important parts to our framework. That, just a minute, why is it not, yeah, okay. So there were two important stages in our framework. The first stage was the get run configuration stage, right? So it needs certain data. This stage needs certain data. For example, as I mentioned earlier, the browser type, environment type, timeouts, the test which needs to be run, and all that information. So that is some kind of data that is required by the framework. So it falls in the purview of data providers. We call this type of data as run configurations. I'm repeating myself, but just make a clear note of it. Now after that, once you have the run configuration, your tests will require a certain set of data. For example, the login IDs, your individual test related information, for example expected results, and all of the things, right? It may also have the product ID, and it could have lots of other things which is required by the test to run successfully. Now these information collectively are called test data because these are required by your tests only. So this information, run configuration, it is required by your framework to start, and the test data is required by your tests to run, right? So this is how we will categorize our data provider needs. We know that we have two requirements. One is to provide data for the framework, and the second one is to provide data for the tests, right? Based on this, we will call the data for the framework as the run configurations, and the data for the test data as the test data configurations. So moving to the next slide. This slide just talks about how we can classify our test data needs into two categories, and the categories are what I have shown to you earlier, right? So if I talk about the data, and in the previous class I have discussed about what are the, let me see if I can draw something here. Yeah, so in the previous class I have talked about the different, let me just quickly check, the pen is okay. So the highlighter is not working, so I will try to avoid writing. So in the previous class we talked about what are the different modules that we will be testing. We said that we would be picking up the login module, we will do the registration, the spelling is wrong here but it's the registration part, and then we would write some tests for the buy functionality of our website, and then the search functionality of our website. Now these are the four broad functionalities that we would be working on. Now each functionality has a different set of data that it requires. For example, login functionality requires a username password, right? To log in or to run your login scenarios, you would require a username and a password, right? It could be a valid username, valid password, or invalid username, invalid password. Similarly, you would require an error message or a couple of other things, right? This list is not exhaustive, and it can be exhaustive in your case. So we would require our error messages also to verify what are the error messages that come up when a particular invalid scenario occurs on your application, right? So these are the three data that we might require in login tests. Similarly, in the registration, as the registration form requires lots of information, specifically the first name, last name, username, password, email, and date of birth, right? So it requires these kinds of information. So we know that there is a need for this information also for our tests. And similarly, buy and search has other sets of information that it requires, right? A test from the buy functionality of your application would require a product name, a product ID to search for a product. Then it would try to compare and verify the price that is listed on the website, and so on and so forth. There could be multiple other scenarios, similar scenarios. And similarly, in the search, you can have a product name, a product ID, where you search based on a product name or a product ID, and then you verify the product name or the product ID. So this is what a test data would look like. This is what the different kinds of test data that you would require, right? Let us move on to the next part, uh, where we will talk about, apart from test data, we need certain things which a framework requires. For example, list of browsers, browser timeouts, flag to indicate different framework configurations. So right now you might not be able to completely understand it, but if you look at this slide you would understand it. Now framework configurations are like list of browsers. I should have a way to get the list of browsers on which our test will run. Similarly, page load timeout, implicit waits, screenshot on failure, whether or not to take screenshots on failure, all this information should go somewhere in a common place, right? So that a framework, when it starts, it can read that file and get all that information. Similarly, IE server path and Chrome server path, right? Now before moving to the data source, let us first pick up the run configurations, because that's the very first thing that your framework would require, right? It would require a way to read a file which stores the run configurations. So let us just quickly see how we can design a simple text file. Let us say that we will store our information in a text file, all the information related to the framework configurations. Let us assume that we will store them in a text file. Now text file should be a good choice for framework configurations, because the framework configurations are not that much, right? They could be only 10, 20 or 30 different framework configurations, right? And the second thing is that reading a text file is comparatively faster as compared to other formats, right? XML, actually reading XML is also not that slow, but reading a text file is quite easy. So I will try to design a text file in which I can store these values. Now in Java you must have heard about a property file. Now, the sole purpose of a property file is to store such kind of information. So let us go back and let us quickly create a new project and name it Framework WebDriver. Uh, Name this project as Framework WebDriver, and inside it, except the default values, inside it there should be a source folder and all the JRE system libraries. Now once you have this framework structure, create a file called framework.properties. Make sure that it has an extension .properties. It could have a text extension also, but let us have the extension as .properties, because this specifies that this file stores certain kind of properties, right? Configuration information. Now if I open this file, I have already created one file for you, so that in the demonstration it doesn't take too much of time. So in the framework properties file, in any property file, a comment starts with a hash. So a hash and anything after that, a simple comment, is a comment, and it will be ignored by a program. So you can write down comments to specify a particular area of configuration, or you can specify a comment to put demarcations between different types of properties. For example, here in the starting timeout comment and the end timeout comment, I can even put an end here. I can specify that here all the timeout related informations will go. Right. If I go back and if I'll take a look at the sheet, you would see that here I have specified the very first thing is list of browsers, and then page load timeout and implicit wait. So in this file, I will store the page load timeout and I will store the implicit wait. Right. So I will say page load timeout equals to 5000, implicit wait equals to 1500. Right. Now the very important thing to understand here is that all the information should be in terms of a key value pair. So the name of the variable should be the key, and followed by a equal to sign, and after that the value. Right. So it's simple. It's quite easy for you to understand. There shouldn't be any line ender or anything like we have in the .java file. So these are the key value pairs. Similarly, I also mentioned here in the list that there should be a list of browsers. You can say that list of browsers is represented by a variable called browser type, and it can have any value of the browser in front of it, and the value should be comma separated. That means it should be separated by a comma. So if someone has to specify IE, they can write it this way. Now I have started with a comment, and I have also, just for the clarity of anyone who's trying, just for the clarity for anyone who's trying to use this, I have specified that possible values of browser type could be Firefox, Chrome, and IE or IE. So it could be any of the three or all three, or any two of the three. So it could be anything. You just have to specify a list of comma separated values. And similarly, if you go back here, you will have screenshot on failure, highlight elements before action, IE server path, and Chrome server path. Now I have specified these variables also here. Right. So this is how we created our simple framework.properties file, and we will store all our framework related information right here in the text file. Now this is important because we have consolidated all the framework needs into one file, and a small change here could change the way a framework works. Right. So if I just say IE here, so our framework will understand that. If I just say IE here, our framework will understand that we have to run all the tests on IE browser only. We shouldn't pick up any other browser type. And if I say Firefox, the framework will understand that let's run the tests on IE and Firefox. Now this is just a text file that we have created. We have to write a supporting code to read this file and to give the information out to anybody who requests any of this information. Right. This is the first part, and the second part is that in the class for demonstration we have only these values. In your case it could be a whole set of new values, right? So it is up to you to decide whether you want to put them into framework properties or you want to put them into test data or any other uh, files, any other data storing format, right? So it depends on you where you want to put it and how you want to put it. I decided that these information should go inside the framework level a properties file, and it should be a text file for me. I'm fine with the text file. You could choose an Excel, XML, or whatever file format that you want. So we will try to understand the framework with text format in mind, right? So once I have this file, I need to create a supporting structure around it to read it, right? So the very first thing I will do, I will create a package called data provider. Now creating packages is a very good way to collect or concentrate all your similar kind of classes in one package, so that uh, it is quite intuitive for a new developer to understand that where he can find a particular set of classes or functionality. So if I say that I have a package called data provider, it means that all the data provider related classes should go inside here, right? So once I have created a data provider package, I will go here, create a class, and I will simply call it the run configuration reader, right? The name is big, you can have a small name, but let's call it run configurations reader or run configuration reader. Now as the name suggests, it has a responsibility of reading the configuration, right? The framework configuration. So I will click on this. I will say I will create this class. Once I have this class, I will write a small comment also here so that we can describe this class. So the first thing that I want to describe about it is the purpose. This class helps us read the framework dot properties file, right? And it will help us get the data from the mentioned file. So it will read it and it will store the data for us for retrieval later on, right? So how can we achieve that? The very first thing we will do, we will create a constructor for this class. Now you have to design your own classes. I hope by now you know how to create a class and how to add functionality to a class. So in this class, the very first thing I would need is a way to represent a property file. So I would say property file, right? Now a property class is a, let me just import the correct package. A property file is a class that helps us read dot properties text file. It's actually properties, not property. And now it is located inside the java.util package. To understand more about the properties class, I would request you, I won't explain it here, I would request you to go through the java.util.properties package. If you search properties space Java, the very first thing that comes up is the properties class. Just take a look at the Java document. You would see that it has quite a lot of methods on it to retrieve information from a property file, right? So for example, the get property method, we will see it in action in a few minutes, and these are the constructor to the property file. Now it can load a simple input stream. Here there is a method called load. It can load an input stream, or it can load from a reader as well. So just take a look at this class, try to understand it, and try to create. Once you understand the class, you would be able to create different what do we call it, different programs using that class, and you would be able to write more efficient code. So I will just leave it to you to read about this class, and in this short span that we have for these videos, I won't be able to cover everything, but I will give you a background, a little information uh, about these classes, and you can just pick them up at your own time. So in this class we have created a constructor. Now this constructor, this class has a basic purpose of reading a properties file, right? So it should know, someone who's creating this class should send it the property file information also. So that class should send it which property file to read. Now inside the class I have created another string variable called file name. This file name would be equal to whatever property file that I will get, right? Once I get the property file, I will create a buffered reader out of it. Now buffered reader is another class which can help us read binary data from the disk, right? So if I just import the correct package, and if I ask you to search for it, you would see that the very first thing that comes up is the Java document for the buffered reader. Just go through the Java document, try to understand what it does. There is lots of good information written here. It says that reads text from a character input stream, buffering characters so as to provide for efficient reading of characters, arrays and lines. Now this class also buffers the data that it reads, the stream that it reads from the hard drive, so which means that it will give you higher performance as compared to a non-buffered reader class. So just go through it, just go through the methods that it has, the constructor and the methods and everything that it has. And you know, there are methods like read line, reads a line of a text, ready, and other things. Just take a look around it and you will understand why we are using it here. Now this buffered reader, now if I go back, you would see that the buffered reader constructor takes a reader, right? It takes a reader class in it. Now to create a reader, we have to create a file reader here because we want to read a file. Now a file reader takes a argument of the file path. I will just give the file path to it, and I will import the correct package. Now similarly, you can take a look at the file reader class also and try to understand what it does. Now this file reader class creates a stream out of the file name that we have given, and this buffered reader class creates a buffered reader out of the stream that we have provided to it. Now using the buffered reader, we will load our properties file, a properties class, and then we will read the information. We will see it in a few minutes. Now this says that it has a throws, this constructor can throw, so I have just added a throws declaration. Now let us load our property file. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to create a new properties. I want to create an object out of it, which I will do like this, and then I will say property file dot load. You would see that the load takes a reader as an argument. It also takes an input stream. It also takes a XML input stream. It can load from an XML file also, but let us load from the reader because we have a reader that we created. I will just simply add the reader here. Yeah, so I have added the reader, and if I hover my mouse over it, it says that this method also throws. So I will just put a declaration around the constructor so that we don't have to handle it here. The caller of this class can handle it by itself. So I have loaded the property file. Once I have loaded the property file, I don't need the buffered reader. So I will simply call a close on it and I will move forward. Now, till this time, we have a configuration class, a run configuration reader class, which can read a properties file given a path name to the given the complete file path. It can read that property file. Now, this class should have some additional functionalities. For example, it should have a functionality to get the list of browsers. So what I will do, I will simply do public list string get browsers, and I will create a simple method which will get me the list of browsers, right? I will import java.util, and how can I get the list of browsers now? So if I go to our framework.properties file, we know that a browser variable is named browser type, and it will contain a list of comma separated values. We know that because this is what the design assumption that uh, we arrived at while designing our framework.properties file. So what I will do, I will say that string names equals to, I will ask my property file to get a property by the name of this. Now pay attention that the name of property is exactly as the name of property, the variable that we declared here. If the name mismatches, if the case mismatches, uh, we won't be able to get the right value. So now we have the browser string. Now we know that the browser string is a comma separated value. If I go back to the framework properties, I know that it's a comma separated value. So I have to split the string in order to get the individual item, right? So I will simply do one thing. I will say that I will write elaborate code right now, but you can skip these steps or condense these steps together into one step, and you can do a lot of optimization here, but just for the understanding purpose, I'm writing the code in an elaborate manner. I would be little verbose in writing my code. I will add as many statements as possible so that it's quite easily understandable. So I would say that browser array equals to browser name, the comma separated value dot, I will split it. I will say that split it using the comma. Split it for me. And I will simply end the statement. Now what has happened is that I got the array, I got the individual elements as an array of string. Now all I have to do is, as this function returns a list, all I have to do is create a list of just give me a minute. It actually, I pressed the wrong button. So I will close this. So all you have to do is just get list of strings and say browser list. Let us name it correctly. List equals to new array list from string, and I will create a new array list. And after that, I will import the right array list. All I have to do is create a for loop, and I will just run through all the items in the array. I would say that browser array, it should be array dot size. Arrays have length. I will just iterate through the length, and I would simply say this increment, and in this loop I less than browser length. In this loop, all I will do, I will just add the browser names here, right? I would simply say that the browser array has a value I, right? Simple as that. And after that, I will just return the browser array, right? Not the array, the browser list. I will just return the browser list. So anybody who calls this method is now able to get the browser list. Similarly, I will keep on adding all the methods, and I will keep on adding all the variables that are required. So I require a page load timeout, right? So I would say public long page load. I would name it like this: get page load timeout. Now pay attention that I have used a long value instead of a string, right? So if you remember from your Java, from your WebDriver training, that a page load timeout is a long value that you specify. So what I will do, I will get the page load timeout in string inside the method, and I will convert it into a long value. I will simply say property file get me a property named page load timeout, right? I can simply say that I need this value, and I will get a page load timeout. Now I have to return a long value. What I will do, I will use the long class, and I will simply say parse long. Parse long is a method on the long class which can parse a string into a long value. So it will parse it into a long value, right? I will just copy this method, and I will use the same method for my another variable called implicit weight, right? So I will say here implicit weight, right? And I would change these values also. Set weight, and here I would just use this variable, and I would say that this is implicit weight, and I will again parse it to convert it back into a long value, and I will send it across. Let us see what other things that we have. We have covered browsers, page load timeout, implicit wait. Let's get screenshot on failure and highlight elements before action. Now screenshot on failure and highlight elements before action are two boolean values. That means that it is asking you, should I take a screenshot before failure, screenshot on failure? So it becomes a boolean value, right? Yes you should, or yes you shouldn't, no you shouldn't. So I will create a similar get screenshot on failure method, and this time I would try not to be elaborate. I would simply write a small code. I would say return this value, and make sure that when you are returning this value you parse it to a boolean. Simple, right? So these two lines have been reduced to one line. Similarly, if you have a better way to do that, just use the better way. I'm doing all this just to just to be very verbose, so that everybody in the class understands it. Similarly, I would create highlight all elements method, and I would say get highlight elements. Similarly, we also need to send the string, which is get IE server path, right? It could be easily returned just by this statement. I would say that return, and here I will pass on the value, which is the IE server path, the key actually, which is the IE server path. And similarly on the same line, you can create get Chrome server path, and all you have to do is just pass the key name Chrome server path. So you have created a simple class which can read a text file specified by the file name, and it can load it, and then it can help you get any information from that particular text file. In our case, it's framework.properties file, right? So it can get us any information. Now I will let me first see what do we have in the slide. Okay, framework data configuration, test data. These are the two things that we have divided our data into: framework related and then the test data. This is the run configuration class. Then there is the test data provider class, which I will pick in the next class, because if I pick it right here, it will make the whole video a very lengthy video. So I want to keep it into small units. So I will talk about test data provider in the next class, but let us complete the run configuration class. So right now we have just created one component, one part of one component of our framework. The component was data provider, and we have just created a run configuration reader. Now you can write unit tests around it, but I will once I have done the test data reader also, then I will show you how we can write unit tests to test our framework code also. So till that time, I will give you a small hack. I will say that, let's say I want to test whether this class is working or not. So what I can do, I can simply create a main method right now. I will delete it once I'm done with my testing, my local testing. I will delete it, but later on I will add a unit test around it. But for the time being, I will just create a program class, and I will have a main method inside the class. Once I have the main method, what I can do, I can simply go and create the run configuration reader for myself. So run configuration reader, I would say reader config reader equals to new run configuration, and as we created this class with a constructor, and the constructor takes a file name string prop file equals to, let us give it a file name also. Now this is the file that we want to read. I will get the file complete file path, and I will put it inside the, I will put it here. I will just correct it, right, and I will pass this property file to my config reader, right. Once I do that, it throws an exception, so it will ask me to add it around a try catch. Once I have this class, all I can do, I can simply say, to test it out, I can simply say sysout the browser list is dot well, just a small coding error. This is not particularly efficient way to write the code, but yes, you can for the testing purpose we can do that. So I can simply say config reader dot get. You would see all the methods that we created are here. So I will just say get browser list for me, and I will do a toString on it, right. So let us see what it prints out, and I can easily run it through the run button here. If I do that, and once it has run, I can look at in the console, I can look at the results in the console, and I would see that it is printing the browser list is IE, Firefox and Chrome, right. Just to verify, what I can do, I can remove Firefox, and I can remove Firefox, and let me run the program again. If I run the program again, and if I look into the console window, it says the browser list is IE and Chrome, right. So This way I can test whether my class is working or not. I can similarly have more data printed out. I can say the page load timeout is, and then I can simply print that out. Config reader config reader dot get page load timeout. Right, this is the method that we created. Right, if I run it again, it will give me the browser list plus the page load timeout as well. You would see that the page load timeout is 5000. This is what we mentioned here, right, in the framework, 5000. Let us change it to let's say 1000. Would it reflect in my code? Yes, of course it will reflect in my code. Now the properties file will be read with this new value, right? I will get 1000 instead of 5000 earlier. So this is how we can create only one component. We can create multiple components, but right now I have just shown you how to create one component which can read the data information. Now the other component would be to read the test data. We will talk about it. We will talk about it in details in the next class. Meanwhile, you can test your class here and then remove the program.java file, because we anyways will write a set of unit tests for that, for all our framework code, right? So I will just remove this file for the time being so that it doesn't pollute my namespaces, my packages. So this is the current state of our project, and let us build upon it with each class, and in the each class I will teach you something new on how to create different components. So I will close this class now. Thank you for joining in. We'll see you in the next class.